Hi, my name is David Whittle. While at NASA, I was the chairman of the System Safety Review Panel. I was also the safety manager for the shuttle program, where we handled the risk documents that documented the shuttle and controlled the shuttle risk for the program. I was also the chairman of the Shuttle Mishap Investigation Team, which was a team that had been established years ago at headquarters and then moved down to JSC, which made me the chairman of the JSC Mishap Investigation Team. One of the things I'd like to talk about, and was key to the accident investigation, was the response plan. One of the big criticisms that NASA received after the Challenger was they did not have a mishap response plan. I wrote the program's mishap response plan, which went into the shuttle's official document, which is that governs how the shuttle works for those types of things. And I also put out a little handbook that was something that people in the mishap investigation team carry with them that documented all of the major phases, all major things that you would be looking at, how to handle stuff, how to document things, how to be a good investigator and preserve that data. It was my definition of the role of the mishap investigation team was that we were to go to be the first responders to the accident. At that point in time, we were in charge of all of the debris, and our job was to collect and protect it until the investigation team, in this case the CAIB, the Columbia Accident Investigation Team, was named, and then they became the people who did the real investigation. On February 1st, I was home. It was the weekend. I did not normally go to work, even though the shuttle was flying. The mishap investigation team just carries on normal hours. I was home, got up. Normally on Saturday, have pancakes, and we were sitting down for breakfast when I got a call from Linda Ham. And Linda's words were, "You need to come in. I think we're going to need you." And at that time, I had no idea of that there'd been any type of a problem. I hadn't listened to the TV, hadn't turned on the radio. We had just gotten up. But the shuttle's going to be on time, or it's not going to be there. And so I figured that something was wrong. Told my wife, I said, pack my stuff. I may be gone a long, long time. And she very quickly threw together a suitcase for me, and I headed out to JSC. Went to the control center. There was already a large group of people that was in the meeting room, and Ron Dittemore was in there as well as Linda. And they said, "You've got about 30 minutes to come back in here and tell us what you want to do." One of the major supporters to the mishap investigation team was the U.S. Air Force, and they had a group called the DDMS, Department of Defense, and the MS slips my mind at the moment. Their purpose was to provide us the infrastructure, if we needed tents, if we needed facilities, whatever the physical things that we need, helicopters, airplanes, that was their role in life to supply us that. And if we'd been into a remote location, they'd have provided food, etc. In this case, I sat down with our officer that was assigned to us, and we started looking around. We had no idea exactly where, we knew the path of the shuttle. We didn't know exactly where the wreck was going to be. And so we started looking around. And one of the things about them is that, they can provide you better things if we're at one of their facilities. We looked at Carswell, just seemed to be too far north. We looked at Louisiana, and That just seemed to be too far south, and so the best place that we could find that was kind of in the mid when we really didn't know was Barksdale. We called the Barksdale at that time and talked to them. There was a lot of activity going on in the military at that point in time having to do with the B-52s, and we were surprised, but they said, yes, come on. They had just finished some type of an investigation there, an Air Force investigation, and the facilities were there, complete with computers and everything. It was a situation where we could just basically walk in and sit down, and we would be in business that day. Called around, made sure that all the Mishap investigation team members, which was 10 locally, and some of them at KSC, that they were prepared to show up. Talked to Ellington folks, trying to find transportation. We ended up taking the 707, the vomit comet people call it. They loaded everything up, and we were off to Barksdale. One of the things that we needed to have was a secure place to put the debris, and the other thing that we needed was a secure place to keep the remains. And those are two items that were key in my mind. And one of the reasons I wanted to be on an Air Force base or a military facility, because the control entrance, and there's going to be a lot of interest in this from the news media. Once we got off the airplane, we had to organize. To me, the key was to break the responsibility up and let people be in charge of their areas. We had one of the people that's on the Mishap investigation team is one of the docs from JSC. I told him, go take care of all their mines. And he went and negotiated and talked to the folks at Barksdale about where they would be. We eventually had some outside support from the military to cover remains, try to identify them. And so this doc took care of everything. All he did was report to me periodically. Here's what's happening. Here's what we got. Here's where we're going. And so I didn't have to worry about that. I knew what was happening. One of the key things was to find out where in the world is everything. And so we put a map up on the wall. We got a bunch of pins. And people were calling in all the time about, I found this, I see this, I see this. And when you start putting the pins in the map, pretty soon it becomes very obvious. We knew what the track was. And you start getting a cluster in certain areas. And so, that's kind of a central point there. So this was all in the first day. This is the first day. And so we're just trying to figure out where everything is. I had a person out of the shuttle program office that I said, you're in charge of documenting everything, taking care of the wall chart, taking care of the things in the big room there. You were to be coordinating that. And so that way I didn't have to worry about that either. I had one of the Mishap investigation members was a guy out of KSC called Bill Ayat. Bill, you're in charge of getting this debris and storing this debris. I want to put it in a secure facility. I want to document anybody that comes in or out of that facility. I want them to have to sign in and sign out. When the pieces come in, I want a picture of them and I want them documented. And so that kind of laid out the ground rules. When we got people into the field, I said, I want to document this stuff. I want to see a picture. I want a coordinates on it. Take a GPS. I want a picture of it and where it lays. And so that if I have a piece of debris, I know where it came from. And maybe we can get some coordination here. Maybe if we start finding a bunch of similar type things in an area, then we'll know that we can look there for left wing, right wing, whatever. We're just looking for a way to be smarter about the search. One of the things that gave us a challenge early on was that the plan was primarily a shuttle program plan, and it did not include in it a roles and responsibility for NASA headquarters. And then when the accident happened, NASA headquarters was interested in keeping involved or keeping track of what was going on. And so they named 3 people that would come down and that would participate in activities. Their roles were finally established as the interface to the outside world. They were the ones who would talk to the press. They were the ones who would talk to the higher-ups that would be interested in the activities of the shuttle recovery. That caused some confusion early on. Later on, Fred Gregory came down and sort of cleared that up for everybody so that we knew exactly who did what to whom and what the roles were. And after that, it worked fine. There was no problem at all. As if there was any problem. There was never really a problem from the standpoint of getting the job done. It was just kind of knowing exactly where the dividing line was between the roles and responsibility of the people involved. And that's probably something that should have been done ahead of time. Defining the search area was important. The fact is, FEMA was there on day one. Apparently, the disaster had been declared by the president. Matter of fact, FEMA, one of the directors of it was at the original meeting here at JSC. And it wasn't very long until FEMA showed up in Barksdale. FEMA shows up with a lot of stuff. Matter of fact, they replaced all of the computers that the Air Force provided with new facilities, and they provided us with all types of things. We still didn't know exactly how long this debris path is going to be, because we just didn't have it. People were calling in, but you didn't know what it was, and there was a great deal of interest, rightfully so, by the state of Texas, and their state of Texas emergency management person was very much involved and very active in the initial stuff, because there was a lot of stuff in towns. It's surprising how much stuff was on top of schools. And so the state of Texas is very interesting in getting all of that stuff, because NASA has told everyone this has very potential to be very hazardous. We have hypergolics on board, we have explosives on board. And so, the people were nervous about anything, even the smallest shred that they saw. And so the emphasis right off the bat was to take care of the towns and kind of get things back to normal. The EPA was involved in that too, because they went out and sniffed the stuff and tried to clear the items that were potentially hazardous. And so it probably took a day or so, maybe 2, to kind of get the major stuff that was impacting the lives in all of these little cities that was in there, to get that taken care of, and then start looking at the big picture about where everything else was. We knew that there was some activity down at Fort Polk, that some stuff had gone in there, and pretty soon we had an idea that it was the heavy stuff, which is what we'd expect. The parts of the engines and the pumps for the engines, those types of things. So that was pretty much starting to define the end of the trail. We put a lot of stuff on the dartboard there, and we were transitioning to by that time we were transitioning to computer models. We had a bunch of people from Stennis show up, and they had tremendous capabilities as far as maps and putting things on maps and sorting the data that goes on those, where you could look at just wing, just tail, just whatever. All of those were tools that would help us better understand where things were. And we said, okay, we need a plan. Well, that's when it was so large. That's when when FEMA proposed bringing in the U.S. Forest Service. The Forest Service is the people they provided would be wildland firefighters. This is in February. There's not a lot of fires and wildland fires in that time. And so all these people, they just work when they're called. They're not employed all the time. And so they were very happy to go to work because they weren't getting, they don't get paid when they're not working. And so they put together a plan about, well, we will bring in the fire service. Then we sat down and said, okay, how are we going to approach this? Well, by that time we had a farmer out in Littlefield, Texas, found a very small piece of tile, about like that. And so when that happened, we said, okay, we probably need to send a group to Carswell, which is up in Fort Worth. And because we were getting some stuff up there, so we sent a group up there, another Mishap investigation team, one of the NASA guys that I work with, and sent them up there because it looked like, that would be a place to go. But then we need to have some philosophy on how you look for this. And so we had, we couldn't spend the rest of our lives for looking for it. We needed some criteria. And so when I talked to the FEMA and to the other folks, I said, okay, we can do a search pattern that guarantees you that we'll find 99% of the stuff, and here's what we think that it will take in time-wise and people, stuff like that. Or we can do it with 95% probabilities. And so, and that governs how far people are apart, how fast they walk. So that was, at that point in time, we said, well, it's reasonable from a time standpoint to go with 95%. And that was in the same time frame when the decision was made, okay, how wide do we search? We had a lot of data. We tried to apply a little bit of mathematics here having to do with distribution, probabilities of distribution. And so we could draw a line right down the center of the path. And we figured that the 3 sigma fall was about plus or minus 3 miles, and then there would be some stuff out of that. And so they set, it was plus or minus 5 mile path. The inside, plus or minus 3, we would hand search. The stuff outside of that, we would search with by air. And by air, I meant helicopters. FEMA had the source for helicopters. They called in people from all over that apparently FEMA has a lot of contracts with a bunch of organizations to support them in an emergency. And so we had like 37 helicopters. And so we had helicopter crews. So at that point in time, it's time to also have other people in charge of these little pieces. And so we had a ground boss, an air boss, a water boss, and then we had a coordinator. And the 4 bosses were astronauts. People listen well to astronauts. And so we had a person, an astronaut who coordinated all the air activities, and then we had one who did the water activities. We brought in the Navy has a group called SUPSAL, Supervisory Salvage, and that's what they do. They dive. And so we brought in the Navy. They had a pretty high officer that came in who managed the everyday activities. They maybe had a few Navy folks, but they called in divers from all over Texas that supported emergency management, or fire department, or police, whatever. And so, but they coordinated it. The water was 49 degrees. They brought in a lot of sonar and other tools to help spot stuff. Primarily in the south part of the lake. There were some other small lakes that later on got involved, but most of it was in the south part of the lake. We had the ground boss who coordinated the activities that we would of every day for the ground. The FEMA and the Forest Service, they looked at this and they said, okay, we need 4 different places to do this. We can't just be shuttling people all over 240 miles. They were supplying buses. the FEMA and the Forest Service come in with huge resources. They set up a town. They provide washing machines. They provide food. They provide all type of utilities, facilities. They pay a commissary. So the people come in and they're basically they live in this place, but for the most part they're living in tents. Temperatures are pretty darn cold. But these people are living in tents. They know it. They're brought in groups of 20 called strike teams. That strike team will come in and work for a couple of 3 weeks, and then they're gone. And another strike team will take their place. Now they may show up again later on, but they limit the amount of time. And they go out every morning. The transportation, the FEMA provided, all of these little towns. They provided all of that. They had to get buses. You're moving. We got 4,000 people out searching, so you're talking about a lot of transportation here. And the other thing that at that point in time is that we're having to deal with all of these little communities and all of these each of the counties and the county judges, because now we're in their territory, and you're getting on people's property, and so now you got their local sheriffs. And so they got people going out and visiting all of these landowners, saying, we're going to come on your property and getting approval and kind of making it less intrusive. So there was a lot of activity going on in the background before we ever stepped out 1 foot on those people's property. We pretty much decided at that point in time that there wasn't going to be a lot of stuff up in the Fort Worth area. In fact, there was a little bit, but not much. And so we closed that operation and brought it back down to where we were. The search teams were broke up into 4 places: Hemphill, Corsicana, Nacogdoches, and Palestine. And there was basically a group set up. There was 1,000 people almost each one of those locations. Now we need to find out how to coordinate all of those 4 locations with our central office, because we wanted to know what was being searched and when and where things were going to be and what was being found. That area was divided up in 2 by 2 mile blocks. We had a lot of capability from satellite images and be able to print. And so we could print these 2 mile blocks on big sheets of paper. We had the coordinates of them. And so what would happen is that the ground boss and in coordination with the rest of us would say, okay, here are the things that we want to search. And then those would be carried up every night to each one of these search areas because each one of these 4 places, it had a commander too, and that person tended to be a Forest Service person, because those were all Forest Service people working for them. And so they would go up to the lead of that camp, say, okay, here's the search areas, and give them pictures. And those pictures were, they have a lot of copies of them, and it was a map, really. And they would give these out to the strike teams, and they would sit down and coordinate with the strike teams. Okay, you're going to go this place, you're going to go this place, you're going to go this place. And they had a map, and then they would go out, they would take them all out, they would give them their map, they would take off, they would spread out, and they were like arm's length, 2 people, their arms apart like that. That's about the distance between them. As these people walked forward down the line, they had a bunch of little marker flags, and they would take, and when they found something, they'd stick a flag in it. And then right behind them was a person from the EPA, and they would come along and sniff it had the sniffers to make sure that there was nothing toxic about that piece of debris. And then we had another person come along that would go and do a coordinates on that, do a picture of it, and then bag it. I'd like to talk a little bit about the debris collection and taking it to KSC, to Kennedy. The debris was spread out so far, you couldn't just pick up a piece of debris and run it in. So they had sort of sub-collection points, and usually it was at little airstrips, little hangars, where they would go in and rent a hangar, and the KSC folks would set up a collection place at each one of these hangars. It was, and they would protect the debris. And then whenever they got a certain amount, then they would bring it up to to Barksdale, where it would go into the major collection. My intention from the very beginning was that we were going to try to reassemble this thing. And I talked to the KSC folks. They had already decided that they were going to use the hangar down there right by the SLF, the shuttle landing facility. And so they were setting up stuff. The other thing is that we had a number of NTSB folks who had done a lot of aircraft reassembly and during for accidents. So I sent two of them up there too. And so they were going to help us do it. They were going to teach the people how the best way to do that is. There was never doubt in my mind. The KSC folks, they just pretty much jumped in and said, "This is the way we're going to get that stuff out there." They hired contracted with an 18-wheeler, actually a company that had a group of 18-wheelers. The KSC security sent some security folks up, and they had a security car escort that 18-wheeler all the way down to KSC to watch it the whole way, so make sure that nothing was lost or stolen. And whenever we had enough that we thought that we could fill up an 18-wheeler, they would load it up. They would box it, very careful not to damage it beyond what the damage was, so it didn't cause a problem as far as identifying problems. And it went slick. Probably in the late February, we had a plan and we were working every day, and it was a routine operation of visiting the centers, coming back. One of the things that we tried to do was keep morale high. Those were bad conditions that people were in, and so we were sending the astronauts every night in the evenings frequently to the sites to make sign autographs and tell everybody how important this was. Since we're documenting everything that come in and we're seeing the stuff that arrives, it's becoming obvious that, number one, you're not finding big parts anymore, and you're finding the smaller stuff, and the smaller stuff probably provides less information than the big stuff does. But we also are looking at our maps and seeing, are we about finished? We figured that, from original plans about 95% that it was going to take 2 to 3 months, and we probably quit maybe a week or two before, if we had predicted that we would be through. Well, we are in the course of that. An Elevon from Challenger washed up on the beach in Florida. So, that tells you that you can get something years later. We just sort of set a date, based on what we're finding and what we're not finding. And the fact that we'd already found twice as much as the experts said we would. Experts said we'd probably find 18%, and we'd found almost 40%. So, we were feeling really good about that. Needless to say, there was a lot of people calling in because they had stuff falling here or there in their backyard, in their front yard, and so we established a number to call, an 800 number. Early on, we wanted to leave a good taste in everybody's mouth about NASA. We had a group of about 3 or 4 people whose purpose was to answer phones and follow up. We would answer that phone, we would get the information, and then we would send. Usually, is somebody associated with the EPA that would go out, but there was a group that was going out. If you had something, we would go get it. We picked up bowling balls. We picked up golf carts. We had a golf cart that was in the form of a football helmet, and a lady called in and reported that and said, I've got this thing that showed up in my yard. It looks like it's got to come from space because nobody has a head that big. Well, they went up and got it. And there was a number of, we took care of all of that. But it also there was still a lot of stuff being reported when we quit, and so we kept that 800 number. We kept a group of folks that worked for the EPA that would go pick up stuff. That number originally rang at Lufkin, and then as we quit, it rang at JSC, and we had 5 people at JSC that were answering that phone for a while, and then things were sort of kind of tapering down, and then we transferred that activity to KSC, and it was a part of the contract of one of the contractors out there. And I would not be surprised if they're still not getting calls on that thing. As the activity in Lufkin closed, we wanted to leave a way that people could report collected items, items that they've stumbled across. And that not only do we have an 800 number, we wanted a way to give them a way to remember that number and keep that in their mind. And so we, talking to fire departments and things like that, and police is one, but we also coordinated with the state of Texas to try to put it on licenses, because we figured people who hunted and fished would be out in the boonies. They would be out in the woods, and they have a high probability of finding something like that. And so we put that number on the back of their license when they got it. And that kind of kept it in people's minds and gave them away, because I'm sure if they wasn't written on that card, they wouldn't remember the 800 number, probably even know who to get. We had posters. We had posters made and posted them all over the place, just to keep it in people's memory. The Columbia had been an original flight test machine, and as a result, had a lot of extra instrumentation on it. It was all over the vehicle, and all that instrumentation was sent to a recorder called the OEX Recorder, Orbiter Experiment Recorder, is what that stands for, and it was of key importance, if you could, to find that thing. Most of the stuff that we found out of the avionics bay was shredded. It was mangled, and so we were really concerned. We didn't think that we'd get much from that. We'd be able to find the OEX recorder, much less get anything off of it if we did. They were driving a truck down around Hemphill. They were coming in. They'd gotten a lot of people had been searching, and they collected stuff. They were putting it back in trucks and bringing it up to the collection area. And somebody saw this thing sitting on kind of a little berm out of the water. That area was down there. It has a lot of water, swamp type stuff. And they saw that box, and they ran over and they grabbed it and just threw it in the back. One of the searchers was a volunteer. We had a lot of people out of JSC and other centers who came in and just volunteered on their own, and one of them was that. And she saw that box, and she says, "I think that's OEX recorder." And they called me, and I says, "I want it on my desk." They brought it in. It looked like you could reinstall it. The only thing that was bad about that thing was on the back of it was a panel with a bunch of connectors on it that were connected into the avionics bay. That was pulled out. Otherwise, the box was in perfect shape. It wasn't even dented. And I called the Arbiter project manager on the phone. Says, "I've got it." We had that box carried straight down to JSC. It did not look like it had been submerged in water at all, and they were able to recover. The tape was good. So there was a lot of luck involved in that. This person spotted it, and the fact that who knows why it wasn't destroyed. All that other avionics stuff, I don't think we got one other box out there complete. One of the lessons learned is that you never have the accident that you plan for. It was worthwhile writing the Mishap Investigation Team accident plan, the shuttle accident plan, because it got everybody thinking about it. It gave us some initial responses. It kind of put things in perspective. But I don't think anybody ever anticipated it would be this type of an accident. We were thinking that it was more likely that maybe you have a launch accident or a landing accident or stuff like that. But for it to just come apart in the middle of the air was not something that was really planned for. We had no idea that FEMA or any of those organizations, the EPA, Forest Service, any of those, we had no idea that we'd ever be shaking hands with those folks. But we couldn't have done it without them either. I don't know how we would have ever coordinated it with them that way anyway. So it worked out, but it was a matter of real-time planning. It was a matter of coordination with the NASA and the FEMA rep. The FEMA rep was really the lead for all of the support stuff that came in. And pretty much right on day one, we sat down together and he says, I'm going to supply you with all your resources. You're in charge of how we use them. And we kept that division of labor, and it worked great. We met every day and talked about and planned about how we were going to do what resources we might need, and they were always ready to supply. Might question me, but that's fine. That's the way it ought to be. The roles and responsibilities are an important thing to set up to start with, particularly if you have a big ego involved. As it turned out, the FEMA folks that we worked with, and they were not my way or no way. They were not type A personalities, and I kind of bonded with the FEMA guy right off the bat. It was interesting to the point that there were several hundred agencies involved throughout the whole investigation, and that includes the fire departments, that includes the county judges, that includes the forest department. It goes on and on and on and on. I think the number came out with there was 300 state, federal, and local agencies. Never had the first disagreement, not a one. The people that showed up, that everybody worked from early in the morning to late at night. The way I guessed it, it looked like we were working 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not heard one complaint. Nobody had a single complaint. It was, what would you like me to do next? And so you have to force them home. I have to force them to go out and get the motel at night and get something to eat so they could be back the next morning at 6 o'clock. To me, the key was of communication with everybody was division, setting people in charge of things and letting them do their job. When we had the strike teams and the centers at the 4 centers, you took them the information. The person out there, they took care of making sure that everything happened, and they sent us the maps back. They marked on the place, and so we knew exactly what was searched, what wasn't searched, what was bad. And so we had a kind of a paper set of communication that let us know what was being accomplished. As far as managing the people out there, that person that was in charge of that camp, that was their job. As far as the helicopters, we had somebody there. He knew what we were search. We sit down, we talked about the search plans. They had maps just like the other ones, just like the ground folks did. So that was, you had, again, paper communications that tell you back, and we had those right at our center where we knew what was being searched and what had not been searched. But one of our biggest challenges was keeping track of the data for all of the pieces that were collected. Early on, the university in Lufkin, they provided some help, and they thought that they had a database, and so things started getting entered in that. Then EPA had a database, and things were getting entered in that. And then we had a database because we're down at Barksdale, because that's where the pieces were showing up, and so we had a database. And so now all of a sudden we got this big collection of databases, and it was a fight from day one to the day last. EPA's ended up really being the very best one, and the one we tried to transition to, and they helped us do that. But it was a major problem, and probably, in retrospect, maybe you should have had a single person in charge of that. Matter of fact, one of my reports to in my post action report to the shuttle program, when I sat down at the program requirements control board and talked to the program manager, was that was an area that really, if you could do that ahead of time, that if you had a database system, that would have been a big plus. Now that assumes that you have an accident similar to what you got right now. It may be that's just something you just put somebody in charge of it that says, okay, your job is to make sure we have a coordinated database. One of the things that impressed me was the morale of everyone. It was wildland firefighters from out in the middle of nowhere who were not very well educated, were not very scientifically smart, were very much supportive of the space program. It was the little ladies who were bringing out cakes and pies to us at the collection areas. Everyone was very supportive. The firefighters that were out searching were in horrible conditions. They were in water. They were getting snakes. They were being chased by bulls. They were, it was bad. They were sleeping in tents and in very, very cold weather. They were marching through the rain, and that was a concern for us. One of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that people knew the importance of what they were doing. Frequently, our astronaut support crew, primarily the ones that were down at Lufkin, as they flew out to the centers to give them their search results, the search maps, and coordinate with the centers, they would go out there and eat with everybody in the dining halls that were set up by the Forest Service. Then they would sit down and they would have a stack of pictures. And they would just sit there and everybody would come up and talk to one of them, and they'd sign their picture for them and hand it to them. The biggest problem they had is they would go out the tent, they would go back around, and they'd get in line again because they wanted to do it again. So it was, all of those folks were very, very pro, very upbeat. And the thing about it is that each of these strike teams of about 20 people, they were changing every 2 to 3 weeks. And so, you had to keep doing this because you had new people showing up all the time. The strike teams, were primarily Forest Service people. We had a lot of NASA people, a lot of contractor people who went up and volunteered their time from all the centers. And so they too, of course, they weren't sleeping in tents, but they too were dedicated to that, and you'd see them in there getting their picture signed as well. But it was such a surprise to me. Usually when you get that many people together, when you have that many personalities, that you have some disgruntled people. You have some issues with personalities. I never saw that. Never. We typically worked 15-hour days. Sometimes it was longer. And sometimes it's hard to get them to leave. That was the most impressive thing to me, was how much people were willing to put into this and be there with a smile every minute. One of the things that the MIT does is that they go to the accident. They're the first ones on the scene. The way I felt was that my job was to gather the information and protect it, and then when the board was selected, that now they were in charge, and they could choose to keep us, or they could bring their own group of folks in to go collect the debris, and they chose, in this case, to keep us. There's a lot of distance between the Accident Investigation Board and the MIT. They came and spent 2 or 3 days with us. I think after that they had some confidence that we knew what we were doing and that we were going to be successful, and they chose to keep us as the collectors of the data and protectors of the debris. And during the course of the 3 months, I would go in and talk to the CAIB and let them know the progress, show them what we're doing, tell them what our plans were, just so that there was a role of communications. The CAIB in the interim, they're going out and they're visiting centers or getting a lot of data. I just didn't want us to be disconnected. So I think it's very important whoever's the chairman or involved with the Mishap investigation team, they keep that communications going. I did it about once a month, maybe a little bit or more often, but no, it was pretty close to once a month. Then as we got toward the end of the thing, it was closeout time. It was not only closeout time with the CAIB, but it was also closeout time with all the people out in East Texas. All of the law enforcement, the county judges were kind of really the center of all that. And so we called all the county judges in and sat down and had a briefing with them so that they could leave with a good closure. We had a couple of meetings with we called them all into our office there in Lufkin, and that's where we closed out. That's where we told them about the stuff that was remaining. That's where we gave them the 800 numbers. That's how we gave them the names they could contact so that we wouldn't leave them hanging. At that time, I prepared a briefing, went to the CAIB and explained to them, here's what we've done, here's what's going. I'm sure that by that time they had been down to KSC and seen the assembly, so they knew we had a lot of pieces down there. And told them it was time to call it quits, call it finished if they approve. Of course, my mind is we worked for the CAIB, and if they said keep on going for a month, we would have kept on going. My key takeaway from the Columbia accident investigation was that I was so impressed with the dedication of the people and how they came together and were willing to give of themselves unbelievably. Anything you asked them to do, they did it. They were supportive in every way, and we're not just talking about the people that were part of NASA, part of the Forest Service. We're talking about the people in East Texas too. We're talking about the people who were providing school buses to take people out early on when they didn't even have gas for them, and so they were paying for gas, hoping to get the money back later. They were the people who were providing food to the initial searchers before the Forest Service got there, just out of their own hearts. It was the support and dedication of all of those people at all levels was just incredible, and that was the positive thing that came out to me. Kind of renews your faith in human nature.